The rain was beating violently against the cold, grand glass windows of the Vance family mansion, but the storm outside was nothing compared to the absolute, calculated cruelty unfolding inside my own living room. I stood in the center of the polished marble floor, my hands shivering, not from the cold, but from the sheer, suffocating weight of betrayal. Right at my feet sat 3 large, black plastic trash bags. Inside them was my entire life. My simple clothes, my old books, and the few modest belongings I possessed. They had been aggressively ripped from my closet, stuffed into plastic sacks, and thrown onto the floor like literal garbage. Standing across from me was my husband of 4 years, Julian Vance. He was dressed in a brand new, tailored Italian silk suit, his diamond watch catching the light of the crystal chandelier. His handsome face, which I used to look at with so much love, was contorted into an expression of pure, newly rich arrogance and visceral disgust. Behind him stood his mother, Victoria Vance, her arms crossed tightly over her designer blouse, a venomous, triumphant sneer plastered across her heavily made-up face. "Take your plastic bags and get out of our sight, Diana," Victoria hissed, her high-pitched voice cutting through the silence of the mansion like a serrated blade. She stepped forward, her expensive high heels clicking sharply against the marble, and intentionally kicked one of my trash bags aside. "Look at yourself. You are nothing but a penniless, boring orphan girl who managed to trick my brilliant son into marriage when he was vulnerable. Your cheap, low-class presence in this household is actively dragging down our social status. Tomorrow, Julian's firm is receiving a $30 million investment from the Pendelton Dynasty. We are finally entering the elite tier of high society. A faceless, ambitionless girl like you simply doesn't belong in our palace." My heart didn't break. It hardened into a solid block of absolute, sub-zero digital ice. I didn't scream, and I didn't let a single tear fall down my face. I slowly lifted my eyes, looking past her to Julian, who was casually pouring himself a glass of vintage scotch, completely ignoring my existence. "Julian," I said, my voice dropping into a quiet, mechanical, and utterly glacial calm that caused his hand to slightly freeze over the crystal decanter. "Are you truly going to let your mother do this? For 4 long years, I stayed in this house, cooked your meals, washed your laundry, and silently managed your emotional breakdowns when your firm was drowning in debt. I gave you everything. You gave me nothing but a boring routine, Diana." Julian laughed loudly, a hollow, arrogant sound filled with newly rich vanity as he stepped forward, looking down at me with supreme contempt. "You typed data for my administrative accounts. Anyone can hire a secretary for $15 an hour. But tomorrow, I am marrying Chloe Pendelton, the daughter of the biggest commercial real estate tycoon in this state. Her family's wealth will skyrocket my firm into a global monopoly. The divorce papers are already signed and processed by my legal team. You are dead weight, Diana. Take your trash and vanish from my city." Before I could even respond, Victoria reached over to the velvet display console near the doorway. In her fingers, she was holding a delicate, faded silver locket. The only heirloom left to me by my late mother, the only connection I had to my past before I entered the orphanage. "And don't forget to take this cheap, rusted piece of junk with you," Victoria sneered, and with a disgusting, mocking laugh, she threw the precious silver locket directly into the large, dirty kitchen trash can near the service entrance. It landed with a hollow, metallic thud against the wet coffee grounds and garbage. A dangerous, slow, and utterly chilling smile spread across my lips. I didn't beg. I didn't dive into the trash to save it. I slowly pulled a plain white linen handkerchief from my pocket, wiped a small speck of dust from my fingers, and locked my hazel green eyes onto Julian's face with a lethal, untouchable clarity. "You should have kept your mother on a tighter leash, Julian," I whispered, my voice carrying a quiet, terrifying authority that caused the warm air in the foyer to instantly drop in temperature. "And you should have checked the master deeds of the investment you were signing tomorrow. Enjoy your palace tonight, because your elite dynasty has exactly until the morning sun to breathe." Without waiting for another word, I turned on my heel, leaving the trash bags behind, and walked out into the freezing midnight rain. They thought they had just thrown an unprotected, penniless orphan into the streets to rot. What their fragile, narcissistic minds could never comprehend was that the 5-year humility trial imposed by my grandfather's ultimate will had officially expired on this exact midnight. The Vance family didn't own a single square inch of their mansion, their firm, or their luxury assets. The entire city's financial district was controlled by the Sterling Sovereign Trust, the largest, old-money private monopoly in the country. And I was Diana Sterling, the absolute, sole biological ruler and matriarch of that empire. To understand how the most powerful financial heiress in the country ended up living as an invisible, submissive housewife for a toxic, mid-tier defense attorney, you have to understand the sacred final doctrine of my grandfather, Arthur Sterling. He was a man who commanded entire banking networks and real estate empires across Wall Street, yet he loathed nothing more than flashy, unearned arrogance. Diana, he had told me inside our ancestral estate before passing the master cryptographic keys of our family trust to my hands. The world is filled with golden parasites who wear expensive suits to hide their hollow souls and massive debts. They treat the weak like stepping stones and worship nothing but the illusion of power. Before you take control of the Sterling monopoly, you must live among them as an ordinary, penniless worker. Find a man when he has nothing. Watch how he treats you when he believes you have no money, no family, and no leverage to offer him. That is how you locate their true moral vulnerability. That is how you know when to execute a total liquidation. For 4 long years, I honored his doctrine with absolute, religious precision. I buried my true name behind a multi-layered cryptographic wall, living as Diana Ross, a quiet, soft-spoken wife who managed the low-level data files for Julian's struggling law practice. When I first met Julian, he was a broke, desperate developer drowning in secondary debt, weeping in his tiny, rented office because major corporate clients refused to trust a man with no capital. I saw a genuine spark of ambition in him, so I became his silent, invisible guardian angel. Using my hidden clearance at the Sterling Trust, I quietly routed multi-million-dollar corporate accounts directly to his desk, allowing him to take 100% of the public credit, the fame, and the wealth. The moment the massive retainers cleared and the mansion was purchased, the humble developer completely vanished. He filled his garage with leased hypercars, bought luxury clothes, and allowed his toxic mother to move in and treat me like an embarrassing, lower-class maid who was lucky to even breathe their air. For the last 2 years, they had openly humiliated me, calling me a dull, ambitionless charity case who was actively holding back their ascent into high society. Tonight, I gave him his final compliance test, and he chose destruction with absolute finality. I stood on the wet sidewalk outside the gates of the mansion, the freezing rain drenching my clothes as a long, majestic, midnight black armored luxury sedan pulled up smoothly to the curb. The door opened slowly, and Marcus, the senior executive trustee of the Sterling Trust, stepped out, holding a large black silk umbrella over my head. He bowed so deeply his forehead nearly touched the wet asphalt. "The 5-year humility trial is officially completed, Commander Sterling," Marcus reported, his deep voice vibrating with a cold, lethal level of financial authority. "Your grandfather's master will has been executed. The entire sovereign asset registry has been transferred to your private biometric signature. We have been monitoring the Vance family for the last 24 hours. "Excellent, Marcus," I whispered, stepping into the warm, leather-lined interior of the armored vehicle as the door closed with a solid, soundproof thud. My hazel-green eyes narrowed into narrow slits of absolute, unyielding ice. "What is the current status of Julian's merger with the Pendelton Group tomorrow morning?" "Julian Vance has leveraged his entire law firm and the mansion's secondary mortgage to secure the Pendelton contract," Marcus replied, opening a secure digital tablet and handing it to me. "He believes the Pendelton family is investing $30 million of fresh capital into his firm. What his small, arrogant mind doesn't know is that the Pendelton Group is a tertiary subsidiary funded entirely by our central banking pool. They are currently drowning in $90 million of toxic debt to the Sterling Trust." I looked at the digital balance sheets, a slow, terrifying smile spreading across my lips. "Call the Central Credit Committee immediately, Marcus," I commanded coldly, looking out the tinted glass windows at the flashing lights of the city. Revoke the Pendleton Group's liquidity waivers. Execute an immediate foreclosure on the Vance family mansion and freeze Julian's corporate clearing accounts. I want their entire family trust completely liquidated before the morning courts open. The husband wanted to enter high society. Let us give him a public execution. The grand executive boardroom on the 90th floor of the Pendelton Banking Tower was a suffocating exhibition of unearned luxury, high-stakes greed, and toxic, celebratory arrogance. It was exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. Outside, the rain had cleared, leaving a cold, pale sunlight that poured through the massive panoramic windows, illuminating the long, polished obsidian conference table. Sitting at the head of the table was Julian Vance, looking sharper than he ever had in his entire life. He was dressed in a pristine, midnight blue bespoke tuxedo, his hair perfectly gelled, and his diamond cufflink catching the sharp morning light. Beside him sat his mother, Victoria Vance, draped in an expensive mink coat, her neck heavily covered in fresh diamonds that Julian had purchased using the firm's remaining operating credit lines. They were laughing, a low, venomous, and deeply satisfied sound that echoed off the soundproof glass walls. Across from them sat Chloe Pendleton, the billionaire heiress, twirling a platinum fountain pen between her manicured fingers, flashing a sharp, triumphant smile. Her father, Arthur Pendleton, the ruthless patriarch of the banking syndicate, presided over the meeting, his heavy gold signet ring tapping rhythmically against the leather-bound merger contract. I still cannot stop laughing about last night, Julian. Victoria Vance smirked, leaning back into her leather executive chair, lifting a crystal glass of imported sparkling water. She turned to Chloe, her voice dripping with malicious amusement. You should have seen the pathetic look on Diana's face when Julian threw those black trash bags onto the floor. She stood there like a frozen, brainless statue, soaking wet in her cheap, $10 gray dress. And the best part? I took that rusted, worthless silver locket her dead mother left her and threw it directly into the wet coffee grounds of the kitchen garbage can. She didn't even have the courage to fish it out. She just turned around and ran into the rain like the homeless orphan she is. Julian let out a loud, arrogant chuckle, adjusting his silk tie with absolute vanity. My mother is right, Chloe. Disposing of Diana was the best corporate restructuring decision I have ever made. For 4 years, she was a dull, heavy anchor dragging down my social prestige. She actually thought that because she typed my administrative balance sheets, she was an equal partner in my destiny. She even tried to threaten me last night, telling me Vance Capital wouldn't survive the morning sun. Can you believe the delusion of a low-level clerk? Chloe Pendleton giggled, a cruel, melodic sound that carried the supreme snobbery of old generational wealth. She reached over, patting Julian's hand with an air of possessive dominance. Well, she is exactly where she belongs now, crawling in the public streets. A faceless, penniless girl like that should thank God she was even allowed to clean your house for 4 years, Julian. But today, you are marrying into the Pendleton bloodline. The moment my father signs this document and transfers the $30 million liquidity escrow into your fund, Vance Capital will become an untouchable global monopoly. Let the peasants rot in the mud. Arthur Pendleton cleared his throat, his deep, thunderous voice silencing the room as he slid the heavy master contract toward Julian. All right, Julian. Enough celebrating the liquidation of your past. The New York Stock Exchange compliance grid is open. Sign the master deed allocation right here, and my central bank will authorize the immediate execution of the $30 million funding block. Let us crown Vance Capital as the new ruler of the financial sector. Julian's eyes flared with an intense, primitive hunger for power. He reached out, his hand shaking slightly with adrenaline, and grabbed the platinum fountain pen. He positioned the tip right above the dotted line, ready to seal his ascent into high society and permanently erase his past. Right at that exact microsecond of Julian's supreme, narcissistic triumph, a sharp, deafening, and horrific electronic screech tore through the boardroom's integrated audio systems, causing everyone to instantly cover their ears in agony. The massive, 60-foot digital market monitor behind Arthur Pendleton didn't just flicker. It violently flashed a blinding, blood-red crimson color before freezing completely on a single, terrifying system notification. Critical compliance halt. All Elim Tim Bargeed Brooders, M Bargeed BY, Supreme Arating Trusty. Julian's hand violently jerked, dropping the platinum pen onto the white paper, leaving a dark, jagged ink stain across the contract line. What is the meaning of this? He stammered, his face turning an ash-gray color under the fluorescent lights. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the boardroom's private server tech closet burst open. The chief internal auditor of the Pendelton Group ran into the room, his tie completely undone, sweat pouring down his forehead in sheets as he gripped a diagnostic tablet with both hands. "Chairman Pendelton! We have a catastrophic structural collapse!" the auditor screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched panic. "Our primary capital pool, the $90 million rolling credit facility we use to back all our subsidiary mergers, it has been remotely wiped from the international ledger. A sovereign financial institution called the Sterling Sovereign Trust has just executed an emergency zero-hour foreclosure on our entire banking infrastructure. They pulled our liquidity certificates. We don't have $30 million to transfer to Julian, Chairman. The Pendelton Group is currently sitting on a $100 million negative margin call. We are completely bricked! W8! Arthur Pendelton roared, slamming his heavy fists onto the obsidian table so hard the crystal glasses shattered. He lunged across the wood, violently ripping the tablet from his auditor's hands. "That is impossible! The Sterling Trust is an old money private monopoly. They haven't touched a commercial interest in 50 years. Why would they liquidate our credit lines today?" Before anyone could scream another word, the massive, reinforced mahogany main double doors of the boardroom were suddenly thrown open with a powerful, echoing crash. 10 towering, black-suited corporate security tactical officers from the Sterling Sovereign Trust marched into the room in perfect, military-grade formation. They did not look at the investors. They immediately lined the perimeter of the room, their faces completely expressionless, radiating an aura of absolute, untouchable authority. Directly behind them walked Marcus, the senior executive trustee of the Sterling Empire, holding a large, sealed leather briefcase bearing the golden imperial crest of my grandfather's trust. But he did not take the lead. He stepped aside, bowed his head so low his eyes touched the marble floor, and held the door open wide. A rhythmic, confident, and echoing click of premium high heels broke the terrifying silence of the boardroom. I stepped into the room. The jaw of Victoria Vance literally dropped to the floor, her glass of water slipping from her fingers and smashing into 1,000 pieces against the marble. Julian fell backward into his chair, his eyes wide, bloodshot, and bulging out of his skull as if he had just seen a ghost rise from the grave. I was no longer wearing the soaked, cheap gray dress from the previous night. I looked absolutely breathtaking, a vision of pure, imperial high society power. My voluminous dark brown hair cascaded perfectly over my shoulders in rich, glossy waves. I was dressed in a custom-tailored, multi-$1,000 royal black silk blazer suit jacket that radiated untouchable authority. Around my neck hung a flawless, priceless emerald pendant that once belonged to the queens of the old world. My hazel-green eyes were narrow, sharp, and filled with a glacial, sub-zero calm that instantly frozen the breathing of every billionaire in the room. And in my right hand, held delicately between my fingers, was the silver locket my mother had left me, completely cleaned, polished, and shining with a brilliant, blinding light. Marcus had retrieved it from the trash before the Vance mansion was even locked down. "Diana!" Julian shrieked, his voice cracking into a pathetic, terrified squeak as he staggered to his feet, pointing a shaking finger at me. "What? How did you get into this building? Security! Throw this crazy, homeless clerk out of here! She's trying to sabotage my merger!" Marcus stepped forward, his deep, thunderous voice cutting through Julian's panic like a guillotine. "Shut your mouth, you insignificant parasite. You are speaking to Commander Diana Sterling, the absolute, sole biological heir to the Sterling Sovereign Trust, the matriarch of the financial grid, and the woman who currently owns the debt of every single soul inside this room." Arthur Pendelton felt his knees literally shake. He looked at the diagnostic tablet, then looked at the emerald pendant around my neck, and his face instantly lost all of its color, turning a ghostly, horrific shade of white. The sterling heir, Arthur whispered, his voice trembling as he fell back into his seat. The anonymous 5-year humility trial. It was you? You were married to a mid-tier developer? I walked calmly to the head of the obsidian table, the security detail moving with me in perfect sync. I reached into my premium blazer pocket, pulled out the wet, crumpled annulment papers Julian had thrown at my chest the night before, and tossed them casually onto the center of the merger contract. I told you last night, Julian, that anyone could replace an accountant, I whispered, my voice carrying a quiet, imperial weight that caused the entire boardroom to break into a cold sweat. But nobody can survive a sovereign audit. Your mother threw my past into the garbage because she thought your newly rich vanity made you a king. Now, look at yourselves. Your billionaire partners are bankrupt, your clearing codes are frozen, and your entire dynasty has exactly 30 seconds left before total liquidation. The atmospheric pressure inside the multi-million-dollar executive boardroom dropped to an absolute, suffocating freeze. Arthur Pendelton, the multi-billionaire patriarch who had commanded the city's commercial real estate grid for 40 years, looked like a hollow, reanimated corpse. His heavy gold signet ring, which had been tapping so arrogantly against the polished obsidian table seconds ago, now shook so violently it made a pathetic, rhythmic clicking sound against the glass. He stared at the diagnostic tablet, his eyes bloodshot, bulging with a level of primitive terror that his elite high society bloodline had never experienced in generations. This cannot legally stand. Arthur Pendelton stammered, his deep, authoritative voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate gasp as he looked up at me. He tried to stand, but his knees violently buckled beneath his weight, forcing him back into his leather chair with a heavy, ungraceful thud. The Sterling Sovereign Trust cannot simply execute an overnight foreclosure on a Tier 1 banking conglomerate. We have asset immunity clauses. We have sovereign government protections. You cannot call a $90 million negative margin call without a 90-day judicial review. The Sterling Trust does not request reviews, Arthur. We write the statutes, I said, my voice carrying a quiet, imperial, and utterly glacial authority that instantly silenced the frantic breathing of every executive in the room. I slowly walked to the head of the obsidian table, the 10 black-suited tactical security officers moving behind me in a flawless, synchronized formation that felt like an advancing wall of iron. Your asset immunity clauses were tied directly to your commercial real estate liquidity. And who do you think secretly financed your real estate bonds when the market collapsed 3 years ago? It wasn't the Federal Reserve, Arthur. It was a private offshore reserve managed exclusively by my late grandfather, Arthur Sterling. Marcus stepped forward, his face completely expressionless, radiating the cold, clinical contempt of a professional executioner. With a swift, smooth movement, he opened the sleek leather briefcase and slammed a massive, thick stack of gold-embossed forensic audit documents directly over the merger contract, covering Julian's unsigned signature with the heavy weight of financial reality. "Look at the master deed assignments, Chairman Pendelton," Marcus announced, his voice booming through the soundproofed glass walls like a thunderclap. "Your entire banking syndicate has been operating on a phantom liquidity bubble for 36 months. You used your daughter's high society status to construct the illusion of infinite wealth. But under the supreme financial codes of the Sterling Trust, you are a bankrupt legal shell. As of exactly 6 minutes past 9 a.m., Commander Diana Sterling has officially signed the revocation order. Your credit facilities are dead. Your commercial licenses are canceled. Your family trust is completely liquidated." Chloe Pendelton let out a sharp, hysterical shriek, her manicured fingers clawing at her hair as she stared at the flashing crimson lights on the massive market monitor behind her. Her custom diamond-encrusted gown from the previous night now looked like a ridiculous, pathetic costume. "Father, do something! Tell them they can't do this! My wedding with Julian is supposed to be broadcast on every high society network tomorrow morning. My reputation! My elite status! You cannot let this broke, pathetic administrative assistant destroy our legacy? Shut your mouth, Chloe!" Arthur Pendelton suddenly screamed, turning on his own daughter with a face contorted in pure, unadulterated rage. He violently shoved her away, his hand shaking as he pointed at the documents. "She isn't an assistant, you stupid, arrogant girl! She is the sterling monopoly! If she pulls our liquidity certificates, our banks will collapse before the morning market closes. We won't just lose our status. We are going to federal prison for structural asset forgery." Julian Vance watched the entire interaction in a state of absolute, visceral paralysis. His mind, which had been bloated with the narcissistic vanity of a newly rich king, was violently shattering into 1,000 pieces. He looked at Arthur Pendelton, the man he thought was his golden ticket into tech royalty, groveling like a beggar. He looked at Chloe, the billionaire heiress he had abandoned me for, crying hysterically like a broken child. And then, his bloodshot eyes slowly tracked back to me. He looked at my custom-tailored royal black silk suit, the priceless emerald pendant glowing against my chest, and the absolute, untouchable power radiating from my emerald green eyes. The terrifying, crushing reality of what he had done hit his chest like a physical sledgehammer, stripping the air entirely from his lungs. The absolute silence that followed was broken by a wet, pathetic thud. Julian Vance had literally dropped from his executive chair, falling directly onto his knees against the cold marble floor of the boardroom. The arrogant, self-proclaimed tech king of the financial sector was now crawling through the debris of the shattered crystal glasses, his custom midnight blue bespoke tuxedo dragging through the spilled water as he reached his trembling, sweating hands toward my polished leather high heels. Diana, please, look at me," Julian sobbed, his voice cracking into a desperate, high-pitched, and pathetic whine that filled the room with waves of pure, unadulterated cowardice. Tears were streaming down his pale, ash-gray face, smudging his expensive presentation makeup. "I didn't know! I swear to God, I didn't know you were the sterling heir. If I had known who your grandfather was, I would have never allowed my mother to speak to you that way. I would have never let her touch your clothes! Julian! What the hell are you doing?" Victoria Vance shrieked from the side of the table, her face twisting into a mask of pure horror as she saw her brilliant, corporate prince groveling like a dog. She reached down, trying to violently pull his arm. "Stand up! Do not humiliate our family name in front of this orphan! She is bluffing! She used her low-level accounting access to manipulate the server screen! Shut UP! Mother!" Julian roared, spinning around and violently slapping her hand away with an expression of pure, savage panic. "You destroyed my life. You were the one who kept telling me Diana was dead weight. You were the one who told me to throw her out so we could take the Pendelton money. You stupid, greedy old woman! You ruined everything!" He turned back to me, wrapping his shaking fingers around the edge of my coat, weeping into the fabric like a terrified child facing execution. "Diana, please, remember our 4 years together. Remember the tiny studio apartment we rented when I had nothing. I loved you, Diana. I only did this because the corporate investors were putting immense pressure on my balance sheets. I was confused. I was blind. Look right here." With a frantic, chaotic movement, Julian reached into his breast pocket, pulled out the wet, crumpled annulment papers I had thrown onto the table, and began aggressively tearing them into shreds with his bare teeth and fingers, scattering the pieces across the marble floor. "See? The annulment is gone! It's destroyed!" Julian cried out, a maniacal, desperate smile stretching across his face as he looked up at me, his eyes wide with an absolute state of raw despair. "We're still married, Diana! We're still a family! You can take 100% of Vance Capital! I'll fire my entire board of directors! I'll put your name on every single deed, every single bank account! Just sign the sovereign liquidity release and save my firm. Please, Diana, I beg you, don't do this to your husband." Victoria Vance, seeing the absolute financial death sentence written on Arthur Pendleton's face, finally realized that the illusion was over. Her arrogant, aristocratic posture completely collapsed. She dropped to her knees right beside her son, her expensive mink coat soaking up the dirty water on the floor, her diamond necklaces rattling violently against the marble as she clasped her hands together, looking up at me with a face twisted in pathetic, desperate repentance. "Diana, my beautiful daughter-in-law." Victoria wept, her voice trembling with the visceral terror of a woman who had just realized she was completely homeless. I was blind! I was ancient and foolish! I didn't see your true grace! Please, forgive a foolish old woman! I'll go back to the mansion right now. I'll crawl into the kitchen trash can with my own bare hands and find your mother's silver locket. I'll clean it. I'll polish it. I'll wear it as a symbol of my respect for you. Just please, don't evict us! Don't take our home away! I looked down at the two parasites groveling at my feet, my face completely expressionless, radiating an absolute, sub-zero calm that cut deeper than any legal blade. I slowly reached down, pulled my coat away from Julian's sweating fingers, and stepped back, leaving them clutching the empty air. "You are 4 years too late, Julian," I whispered, my voice slicing through their sobbing like a diamond scalpel. "When I met you in that tiny apartment, I gave you my absolute loyalty. I used my hidden sterling clearance to quietly inject elite-grade corporate accounts directly to your desk while I lived in a simple $10 dress, washing your clothes in silence to honor my grandfather's will. I gave you a baseline compliance test, and the exact second you tasted wealth, you and your mother treated me like a worthless dog." I paused, a dangerous, slow, and utterly freezing smile spreading across my lips as I looked down at the shredded annulment papers on the floor. "You didn't destroy a marriage last night, Julian. You completed a liquidation," I whispered coldly. "You told me anyone could replace an accountant, so go ahead, Julian. Replace me. Fix your $90 million negative margin call yourself before the clock strikes noon." The executive boardroom had officially dissolved into a terrifying, primitive theater of high society warfare, corporate desperation, and absolute psychological destruction. The polished obsidian conference table, which had been designed to host multi-million-dollar financial alliances, was now covered in the scattered, torn remnants of the marriage annulment documents and shattered crystal glass. Chloe Pendelton, the billionaire heiress whose cold, snobbish laughter had filled the room just minutes ago, suddenly lost every single ounce of her aristocratic composure. Her face, usually mask-like and perfect with premium cosmetics, was now twisted into a mask of pure, hysterical venom. She stared down at Julian Vance, who was still groveling on his knees, clutching the empty air where my coat had been, weeping like a broken animal. With a sudden, violent screech of her high heels against the floor, Chloe lunged forward. She did not care about her designer business suit, nor did she care about the 10 armed Sterling tactical security officers watching her with clinical detachment. She reached down and violently slapped Julian directly across his face with a loud, resounding crash that echoed off the soundproof panoramic glass walls. "You pathetic, lying, low-class piece of trash," Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking into a high-pitched, unhinged scream as she pointed her sharp, manicured nail right at his bleeding lip. "You told me you were a financial king! You told me your ex-wife was just a stupid, nameless, charity case accountant who was leeching off your brilliant mind. You used my family's prestigious banking reputation to cover up your bleeding, over-leveraged corporate liabilities. You scammed us, Julian. You dragged the entire Pendelton dynasty into your radioactive, criminal ruin." Julian stumbled backward against the floor, his hand gripping his bruised cheek, his hair completely disheveled, falling across his forehead in pathetic, sweat-drenched strands. He looked up at her, his eyes bloodshot and filled with the wild, erratic panic of a trapped rat. "Chloe, please, you don't understand!" Julian yelled back, his voice cracking into a desperate sob as he tried to crawl away from her. "I didn't scam anyone! I genuinely built the trading algorithms! I didn't know the master funding codes belonged to the Sterling Trust!" "Vivian, Diana never told me. She hid everything from me for 4 years. She set a trap for our family." "She didn't set a trap, you arrogant idiot. She gave you a loyalty compliance test, and you proved to be a faithless parasite." Arthur Pendelton roared from the other side of the table. The elderly patriarch of the banking conglomerate looked like he had aged 20 years in a single second. He walked over to Julian, his heavy leather shoes stomping over the torn papers, and violently kicked Julian's executive leather chair aside, sending it crashing into the panoramic glass. Arthur turned his back on Julian, his hands shaking violently as he looked at me, falling directly onto his knees against the cold marble floor, his heavy gold signet ring tapping pathetically against the stone. "Commander Sterling, Diana, Please, hear my plea. The Pendelton family was completely deceived by this newly rich fraud. We had no knowledge of how he treated you behind closed doors. If I had known he threw your mother's sacred heirloom into the garbage, I would have personally broken his hands. Please, do not liquidate our primary rolling credit facilities. If our banks freeze when the morning market opens in 15 minutes, my family will lose every single piece of real estate, every single commercial asset we have owned for generations. Do not let us drown because of this vermin. Victoria Vance, seeing the multi-billionaire chairman of the Pendelton Group groveling on the floor right next to her, completely lost her mind. Her fragile, narcissistic delusion of aristocratic superiority was permanently shattered. She lunged toward Chloe, her fingers clawing at the air like a madwoman. Don't you dare strike my son, you greedy girl! Your father's banks were already drowning in $90 million of toxic debt before we even walked into this room. You wanted my son's brilliant trading network to save your failing legacy. You are the parasites, not us! Silence! Marcus's deep, booming voice cut through the screaming like a lightning bolt, instantly freezing the movements of everyone in the room. The absolute, crushing weight of his authority silenced the chaotic cackle of the broken villains. Marcus stepped forward, turning his attention to me, bowing with absolute, religious reverence. Commander Sterling, the clock is ticking down to the final seconds before the opening bell. The federal authorities have just breached the lower perimeter of the Pendelton Tower. Your orders have been executed to the absolute letter. I stood at the summit of the boardroom, my hands calmly folded behind the back of my tailored royal black silk blazer, my face completely expressionless, radiating a terrifying, sub-zero aura of sovereign finality. I looked down at the four individuals groveling, screaming, and culling each other in the dirt at my feet. "Open the doors, Marcus," I commanded, my voice dropping into a quiet, mechanical calm that made the room feel like a modern execution chamber. Let the law dismantle the rest of their illusion. On the exact second my command left my lips, the heavy, reinforced mahogany main double doors of the executive boardroom were violently thrown open for the second time. But this time, it wasn't the private security forces of the Sterling Trust. 6 towering, armed federal marshals dressed in tactical gear, accompanied by white-coated forensic investigators from the Securities and Exchange Commission, marched into the room. Leading the detail was a senior federal prosecutor, holding a high-priority, red-stamped judicial mandate bearing the supreme crest of the United States District Court. "Federal agents! Nobody move!" the prosecutor announced, his voice slicing through the thick, toxic air of the room like a cold steel blade. He walked directly to the head of the obsidian table, completely ignoring the weeping billionaires on the floor, and looked straight at Julian Vance. "Julian Vance, you are officially under arrest for multi-million-dollar corporate forgery, grand larceny, systemic escrow embezzlement, and the deliberate falsification of international asset registries." Julian let out a loud, horrified shriek, his body convulsing with pure, primitive terror as 2 massive federal marshals grabbed his chained arms, violently pulling him up from the floor. The heavy, cold steel handcuffs clicked tightly around his sweating wrists with a definitive, metallic snap. "No! No! You can't arrest me!" Julian screamed, his voice breaking into a pathetic, high-pitched sob as he struggled against the iron grip of the marshals. His expensive midnight blue tuxedo jacket was violently torn open during the struggle, revealing the sweat-stained fabric underneath. "I am a high society developer. I am signing a $30 million merger right now. Ask Arthur Pendleton. Ask Chloe. This is a technical misunderstanding. My ex-wife. She manipulated the server logs. She is the criminal, not me." The forensic logs were submitted directly by the Sterling Trust mainframe, Mr. Vance, the prosecutor replied coldly, his face an unyielding wall of legal reality. "Your own administrative database shows a 4-year history of illegal client escrow transfers used to finance your private luxury vehicles, your mansion, and your mother's jewelry lines. You didn't build an empire, sir. You built a federal fraud liability." The marshals didn't hesitate. They didn't even allow Julian to adjust his clothes. They began dragging him brutally across the polished marble floor, his custom leather loafers scraping uselessly against the stone, his chains rattling horribly as he was hauled toward the executive elevator banks like a sack of garbage. "Julian, my son!" Victoria Vance screamed, trying to run after him, her expensive mink coat falling off her shoulders, stepping directly into the puddles of dirty water on the floor. But before she could take 3 steps, 2 female federal deputies blocked her path, their faces completely expressionless as they clicked a secondary pair of steel handcuffs around her wrinkled wrists. "Victoria Vance, you are being detained as a primary material co-conspirator to corporate fraud and asset concealment," the deputy announced, forcing her arms behind her back. Victoria's face completely deflated, her mouth hanging open in a silent, horrified gasp as she realized she was being stripped of her luxury life forever. Arthur Pendelton and Chloe were not spared either. The forensic investigators immediately began sealing every single computer terminal, every leather briefcase, and every document directory in the room with bright orange federal seizure labels. The Pendelton banking dynasty was officially frozen, radioactive, and dead before the market could even open its gates. The extraction was deliberately orchestrated to maximize their public social execution. The marshals dragged Julian, Victoria, and the Pendelton family down the glass executive elevators, completely visible to the hundreds of corporate workers in the lower offices, before pushing them out through the grand marble lobby of the tower. Outside, the scene was an absolute, blinding sea of flashing lights, roaring sirens, and hundreds of media reporters from every single major financial news network in the state. Marcus had leaked the forensic data logs to the press exactly 20 minutes ago. As Julian Vance was pushed out through the heavy revolving glass doors into the cold morning air, the journalists instantly swarmed the perimeter, their cameras capturing every single drop of sweat, every tear, and every stain on his torn tuxedo. The self-proclaimed tech king of the city was completely exposed to the global public as a pathetic, small-time thief. He looked back one last time through the crowd, his eyes desperately searching the upper terraces of the skyscraper. I stepped out onto the grand stone balcony of the 90th floor, looking down at the chaotic circus below. The cold morning sun cast a magnificent, golden glow across my custom royal black silk suit, and my mother's silver locket caught the light, shining like a beacon of absolute, unyielding justice. My hazel green eyes watched his final descent into the back of the dark federal transport vehicle with an icy, untouchable peace. Julian truly believed that because I chose to live humbly, work quietly in the shadow of my father's memory, and serve his family with silence, I was an easy target to be crushed, humiliated, and thrown out like trash. He forgot the ultimate, sovereign law of the old money universe. Never stomp on the quiet clerk who secretly owns the entire infrastructure you are trying to run. The massive, soundproofed oak doors of the federal courtroom in the Southern District of New York closed with a heavy, definitive, and echoing thud. Inside, the atmosphere was frozen solid with the absolute, uncompromising weight of federal justice. The grand, bloated illusion of Julian Vance's corporate dynasty had been completely ground into fine, microscopic dust, leaving behind nothing but the raw, bleeding wreckage of his narcissistic greed. Julian stood behind the dark wooden defense table, his body trembling so violently that the heavy steel shackles around his wrists and ankles rattled against each other, creating a pathetic, metallic sound of total defeat. The custom-tailored midnight blue Italian silk tuxedos and the multi-$1,000 diamond cufflinks were completely gone. He was dressed in a coarse, heavy, brilliant orange inmate jumpsuit that scratched against his pale skin. His face, once radiating the smug vanity of a high society king, was now hollow, gray, and permanently deflated by months of absolute, visceral terror inside the federal holding facility. "Julian Vance," the federal judge announced, her voice vibrating through the vaulted ceilings of the courtroom with a cold, unyielding authority. She adjusted her glasses, looking down at the massive mountain of digital financial logs submitted by the Sterling Sovereign Trust. "This court has completed its comprehensive review of the forensic data networks. You did not simply make an aggressive financial move. You deliberately executed a predatory, multi-million-dollar criminal embezzlement scheme. You weaponized falsified client retirement escrows to construct a life of luxury, and you used fraud to deceive the entire banking sector. The law will not tolerate parasites who steal the integrity of others to crown themselves kings." The judge lifted her heavy wooden gavel and slammed it down with a thunderous, echoing crash that shattered the final, remaining fragments of Julian's soul. I hereby sentence you to 20 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary with zero eligibility for early release or parole, the judge decreed without a single ounce of mercy. Furthermore, under supreme federal asset forfeiture warrants, every single asset under your name, including your frozen offshore venture accounts, your luxury penthouse, and your leased hypercars, is permanently dated to satisfy the massive civil damages owed to the Sterling Sovereign Trust. Your co-conspirator and mother, Victoria Vance, is hereby sentenced to 7 years for material complicity and criminal asset concealment. This court is adjourned. Julian went completely hysterical. He let out a loud, high-pitched, and pathetic shriek that sounded like an animal facing execution. He struggled frantically as 2 massive federal marshals grabbed his chained arms, lifting him entirely off his feet. The iron links around his ankles scraped horribly against the hardwood floor as they began dragging him toward the dark holding cells. "Diana! No, please! Tell them it was our shared business!" Julian screamed, his voice cracking into a desperate, terrified sob as he looked back at the gallery, tears smudging his pale face. "I built that firm for our future! I didn't mean to throw your mother's locket into the trash! Diana, save Emmy! I am your husband!" I stood dead center in the front row of the gallery, wearing a magnificent, custom-tailored dark navy blue executive silk dress that radiated untouched, imperial power. My hands were calmly draped over my lap, and my emerald green eyes watched his desperate extraction with an icy, absolute calm. He had treated my silence as weakness, and now, the system he tried to exploit had permanently deleted his existence from the world. 1 full year has passed since that freezing midnight outside the luxury mansion when Julian Vance slammed his wedding ring onto the marble floor, stuffed my clothes into black plastic trash bags, and told me to vanish from his sight. The Sterling Sovereign Trust has achieved absolute, undisputed dominance over the financial and real estate infrastructure of the entire country. By permanently shifting our multi-billion-dollar capital pool to protect the ground-level workers and honest innovators, our banking firewall has become completely unbreachable, commanding over $80 billion in total sovereign assets worldwide. I stood in my magnificent, glass-walled office on Park Avenue, holding a warm porcelain cup of premium black coffee. The beautiful afternoon sun was setting over the Manhattan skyline, casting a warm, golden glow across my dark mahogany executive desk. Sitting right in the center of the wood was a beautifully polished silver frame holding a photograph of my late grandfather, Arthur Sterling. Next to it sat my mother's silver locket, glowing with an eternal light. Marcus walked into the suite quietly, stepping to my side with absolute reverence, and placed a secure, encrypted digital tablet onto the desk. "The annual inmate operational logs have just updated, Chairman Sterling," Marcus said with a respectful, proud smile. I opened the file, reviewing the final status on our legal ledger. Julian Vance had just completed his first year at the maximum security federal facility. The brilliant chief executive officer who once bragged about his elite trading algorithms and high society prestige was now spending 16 hours a day inside the prison's low-end electronic recycling yard. He sits in a dark, concrete corner, wearing heavy rubber gloves, performing the grueling, mind-numbing manual task of stripping rusted copper wires and performing basic, low-level data entry on ancient monochrome computer terminals. He works frantically under the watchful eyes of armed guards for exactly 12 cents an hour, performing the exact same repetitive, invisible machine labor he once looked down upon when he threw my clothes into the mud. I closed the file, looking out at the vast, breathtaking horizon of the city. I felt a profound, beautiful state of absolute peace in my soul. Julian truly believed that because I chose to live humbly, work quietly in the background, and honor my grandfather's memory with silence, I was an easy target to be crushed, humiliated, and discarded for a flashy contract. He forgot the ultimate law of the old money universe. Never stomp on the person who built the operating system you were trying to run. Never mistake humility for weakness, because the quiet clerk typing data next to you today might just hold the master kill switch to your entire empire tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening to this story on Cold Calm Stories 1. If you believe that true integrity always outlasts arrogant parasites, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dive dramatic tales. See you in the next story.